Hi guys, so this is a video about negative self-talk. It's something that comes up a lot and it's really surprising to see how people think and talk about this. So I just wanted to put a few pointers down to try and help if this is something that you feel affects you. The first thing to understand is when it comes to negative self-talk, self-criticism, having a dialogue in our heads is not something we're born with. We have to learn that. And if it is something that you find yourself doing in a way that feels perhaps quite automatic or like you can't stop it, the good thing to know is just because it has been learned, it can also be unlearned. New things can be learned. As with any of these learned processes, it's not innate. Okay. The other thing is when we are in that emotional space, we are far more likely to be feeding ourselves negative talk which includes a lot of generalizations, inaccuracies. I refer to this, broadly speaking, as low resolution thinking. So an example might be, I didn't do well in my driving test, I'll never learn to drive. So there's that absolute sense of, now whilst that might feel like something that just happens at the time that we start to get into that cycle of speaking to ourselves in that way, what we have to be really conscious of is what that does to further our emotional state if we're being very hard, critical on ourselves. And people will often say, I say things to myself that I wouldn't dare say to my worst enemy. That's the level at which people have this stuff in their minds. But the important thing to know is if you're using those words, they are not harmless. It is not without consequence. If they drive us further into that emotional state, by which I mean anxious or depressed in mood, then we're not doing ourselves any favours by perpetuating that. It will take us further and deeper into that state. It's important not to buy into that stuff and to bring our ability to analyse and be rational to mind, which everybody has when they feel calm and relaxed, so that we're not falling for lies that we're feeding ourselves. More than that, though, is really when we're talking to ourselves in this way, we have to understand that we're not our thoughts. We're not our thoughts any more than we are our nose or our thumb, for example. Our thoughts are just part of us. They're an energy that for most people would experience it somewhere in and around the head, and that it's not, say, the talk is not coming from the stomach or the foot, for example. Now, I know that might be a really weird thing to say, but it's important to get this understanding that you're not your thoughts. Your thoughts are a part of you, and you can be in relationship to those thoughts in a way that makes change much more possible. If you feel very blended and immersed in them, then that can be that bit harder. So what we refer to in therapeutic terms is to disidentify from the thoughts. Now there's lots of ways that you can do this. One really simple and often quite effective way is if you locate where those thoughts appear to be coming from, be it in the back of the mind, the top of the head, wherever it is for you, to take your hand and place it on your knee or place it out in front of you, palm side up, and just put those thoughts in that hand. It can take some practice to do this, but just to place the thoughts in the hand and to hear them coming back from the hand. Now what this does in a very odd way is to give you just some space from what might have felt like it was coming from behind, that it was just unstoppable and oppressive, to put them somewhere different. Now beyond that, you can start to play around with how those thoughts sound, to give them a different voice, a different tone, all of which is just helping to separate you from the thought and give you some space, give you some relief from it. But really importantly to understand, these thoughts are not without consequence. If we indulge ourselves in negative self-talk, really critical stuff, then it drives us further into an emotional state in which, again, we are more open to suggestion. So we're more able to take on ideas without that critical filtering. So if we're saying to ourselves, I will never learn to drive, I'll never meet somebody, everybody else has it better than me, everybody else is better than me, these kind of generalized broad brush statements, then what we're doing quite unwittingly is to give ourselves a self-suggestion, an auto-suggestion as we would call it, which starts then for the subconscious to try and make that the case. If we're giving ourselves that command, the subconscious mind is then seeking to try and make that our reality. So unwittingly, we've outlined the very thing that we don't want to happen, certainly when we're in a more rational space. So again, just be very mindful of, not only do these negative thoughts take us into a more emotional space, but they can also really start to feed into our subconscious experience, and for our world to start to appear, our reality start to appear to us through that filter of negative talk. So a few things there that you can do if this is something that affects you. Please just be mindful of the power of these words if you're using them with yourself. Often, again, if somebody is only hearing these things in the privacy of their own head, then they can be very cruel, very vicious in tone, but because they're not being exposed to other people, then they stay within that private space and they can get really kind of whipped up and quite vicious. This is one of the roles that a therapist will play, is to help somebody, to project them, to put them out into a room, into a shared space, and in doing so can often gain new perspective and start to perhaps dismantle some of these negatively held thoughts or beliefs. So I hope that's useful. If you have any comments, please drop them in the feed. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Thanks, Anne.